As many of you know, we just elected the first Black woman Speaker of the PA House, and Missy was busy with that vote, and Noah was busy with votes. I see Deb and Draka is on. So we are going to begin. So good evening, everyone. My name is Jill Zippin, and I am chairwoman of Democratic Jewish Outreach Pennsylvania, the only Jewish Democratic PAC in the state of Pennsylvania. We are proud members of the Jewish Battleground Coalition. The Jewish Battleground Coalition are battleground states that work together to engage Jewish Democrats to get more Democrats elected across the country. The states that are in the coalition are Arizona, Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And as you can see from these states, we are doing really good work in all of these states. Florida's a little troublesome, but we are doing good work in these states. We have great speakers with us tonight. We have Daniel Squadron from the States Project, as well as 3 elected officials. Daniel's going to speak first, and then the elected officials will say a few words, and then we're going to go into Q&A. So I'm going to just give a brief introduction of Daniel and 2 of the elected officials, and then Linda Frank of Wisconsin will introduce Rep. Deb Andraka. So Daniel Squadron is the co-founder and executive director of Future Now Fund, which States Project is a part. The States Project is a national effort exclusively focused on the entire life cycle of state legislatures, both helping Democrats flip legislative chambers and also providing legislative support to help majorities achieve results. His goal is to turn our state houses blue, which, as we know, is extremely important. We have 3 elected officials with us today. They are now all here. We have State Rep Noah Arbit, who is the co-founder with me of the Jewish Battleground Coalition, and he put his feet to the fire, ran for office, and won. State Rep Noah Arbit became the youngest LGBTQ+ person ever elected to the Michigan legislature, and only the 2nd Democrat to represent West Bloomfield and Commerce in the House since before the Civil War. Noah is the founder of JBC, as I said, and former chair of the Michigan Jewish Democratic Caucus. And I'm really proud to introduce as well State Rep Melissa Serrato. She's my state rep. Yay, Missy. She won her race in November of 2022, a few months ago, by 63 votes. That's it, 6-3. She defeated a 6-term GOP incumbent who people tried to knock off endlessly. Her win was pivotal in flipping the PA House to the Democrats for the first time in 12 years. And yay, today we have the first Black woman Democratic Speaker of the House in Pennsylvania. That deserves a round of applause from everybody. Linda Frank, who's chairwoman of I wanted to combine the 2 states. Wisconsin Jewish Democratic Caucus is going to introduce State Rep Deb Andraka, who's her state rep, I believe.
Yes. Thanks, Jill. Actually, I'm a co-chair of Wisconsin Jewish Democrats. We're not a caucus yet, but who knows? In January 2020, I went out to breakfast with somebody named Deb Andraka, and little did I know today that I would be sitting actually in Beijing, introducing her on a Zoom meeting to the Jewish Battleground Coalition, and that she would be my 2-time Democratic state assembly person, having flipped our district after a 14-year incumbent weatherman who doesn't believe in climate change lost. And who would have believed that when we had that breakfast, we wouldn't have nobody would have too many breakfasts out after that, and that Zoom would be a daily part of our life. Deb, as I said, won in 2020. She won in 2022. She has been a fabulous representative for us in Madison. And as difficult as that is, because the Wisconsin legislature is not exactly her friends, and there was a target on her back from the minute she got there. But one of the main things that inspired her to run was teaching in her local suburb schools, I think as a substitute even, and realizing that the kids had a drill in case there would be a shooting at their school. And these were like first graders. And this was only one of the really, positive, heartfelt, and intelligently thought out reasons that Deb ran, and we're very proud to have her in the Senate. In the Assembly. She decided not to run for the Senate, and to be with us tonight.
Fabulous. So we're going to start with Daniel Squadron. He's going to tell us about the amazing work that the Gates Project is doing. So take it away, Daniel.
Great. Thank you so much, Jill, and all of Democratic Jewish Outreach of Pennsylvania, in particular, my mother-in-law, Dina Lichtman. Just imagine being a Jewish mother-in-law, and the first thing you know is before your son even marries your daughter, he decides to run for state legislature. And then even worse, he leaves state legislature and keeps working on them without even the title. So very loving and supportive mother-in-law, and to all the other mothers and mother-in-laws on the call, you probably have it better than mine does. But hopefully you will also believe by the end of this call, which I know you already do to some extent if you're here, that actually state legislatures, while maybe not having all of the glamour of being a doctor or a lawyer, are actually the center of American politics. Certainly, I believe deeply they are the center of the risk to American politics. I'm a little embarrassed to be speaking before the incredible public officials we have here, so consider this the opening act to really hear from them and really understand the deeply profound role that they play in their states and in our country's future. State legislatures are not a trailing indicator to Donald Trump's wild sort of destruction of our politics. In fact, they are in many ways the source of it. I was in the New York State Senate when Donald Trump first came onto the national scene as a seriously contending, well, not at all serious, presidential candidate. And the thing I was struck by was just how familiar a lot of what he was saying was. It wasn't familiar in the national political scene, but if you had been in state legislatures, even in a state like New York, where I represented Lower Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn, you were used to it. The kind of politics that Donald Trump sold and that has now taken over the Republican Party, I would say the proto-fascism and quasi-authoritarianism that you see within it, the denial both of who we are as a country and the best parts of the American promise, and the fundamentals of democratic process are common in state legislatures around the country. And that movement, both the Republican Party and that movement in the Republican Party, in fact, have dominated state legislatures going back to 1972. In fact, a stream of highly conservative Republicans wanted to take their party back, really back to the 1920s or before, and the place that they looked to do it was state legislatures. They did it with great success for a long time, and frankly, our side did little to nothing, overlooked and underestimated state legislatures for decades. There's a few reasons for that. On their side, they have a lot of donors who have a literal financial return on investment by taking over state legislatures. On our side, we have folks who are in it because they are hearing and reading and learning about what's happening in politics, much more national than local. And that challenge has been a structural one for 50 years. So in 2017, I left my office in the state Senate to co-found the effort that is now the States Project, because I believed we needed legislatures that were both bluer in the face of Trump's takeover of the Republican Party and also better. And when I say better, it's not because any of the great public officials we have on tonight or any of the many of the other 7,200 state lawmakers that we have around the country from both parties are incompetent or otherwise deficient, but they exist in a structure that is designed to make it extremely hard to do the right thing. Under-resourced, understaffed, under-focused on. In fact, and I think they can attest to this, there is a certain amount of focus on them from the small number of vested special interests that walk the halls of their capitals. Raise your hand if you walk the halls of your capital regularly to lobby for a narrow interest issue that you have a financial return on investment for. No one here, but you know what? There's a few dozen in every state chamber, and they have inordinate power. The idea of the States Project is to change that dynamic, to make it easier for state lawmakers to work for the people who hire them, the constituents in their districts, and to work for the greater good. So that's what we do. On the campaigns side, we raise as many dollars as we can so that we can deliver them into districts that are likely to be tipping point districts for governing power in state legislatures. And we try to make those campaigns aware of tools to run better campaigns. I don't know if it's true of all of the folks on the call, but I know it's true of at least one, and I think two. First office they were ran for, state legislature. Their campaign manager was probably a first or second time professional in campaigns at the time they ran. Consultants in states have enormous power and often just like to do what's happened before. So we try to come in with resources for these campaigns and the tools to run evidence-based campaigns based on a pretty simple set of ideas. Data to understand what makes the biggest difference in spending. Dollars so that that data can be turned into effective voter communication by the campaigns themselves, wherever the campaign finance law allows that. And door knocking, especially by the candidates themselves. And here I'm going to embarrass Rep. Serrato, and it's a big mistake because she's now fully ensconced in the majority as of today, so be careful. She's gone from an observer to the legislative process with an all-access pass around noon today to one of the most powerful people in the state of Pennsylvania, and boy, is that good news. So we do a thing where we say whoever knocks on the most doors among the candidates we support, we'll contribute more dollars to. Because if you're a candidate for office, especially for state legislative office, you have two polls on your time: raise money or meet voters. We say, let's take that poisonous choice off the table. The more voters you meet, the more dollars will move to you. So again, Rep. Serrato, I hope I'm not getting you in trouble here, but there were certain people, powerful people in Pennsylvania politics said, don't do that. Don't knock on the doors, just raise money. We need the money. But to her great credit, she said, well, I trust the States Project. I'm going to go out there and knock on doors. I'm going to trust that the dollars will come if I do the right thing. She personally knocked on nearly 10,000 doors. I personally knocked on 7,684 doors or so 15 years ago when I ran in my Democratic primary and I still remember every one of them. I certainly remember every night that I was out there and the shoes that I literally walked holes into. And she knocked on more doors than that. But this is what was really cool. We then said, look, if folks are going to go out there and do TV ads, which can sometimes be a waste of money, but are actually a good way to get known when you're a state legislative candidate, which people don't focus on, make sure we're testing the ads to see what really lands with constituents. This is the coolest thing. So the professional said, I want to test this message and that message. Rep Serrato or candidate Serrato said, I've been on the doors. I know the message that most connects with the people who I want to have hire me. Let's test this one too. They went out there and they tested it. You know what ad tested best? The one written by professional A or professional B, or the one that candidate Serrato knew from the doors. That ad tested through the roof. That's the ad that actually allowed her to introduce herself to her constituents. She won by 67 votes, every single door she knocked on. And that ad that she knew better than any so-called professional because she knew her future constituents is the one that made the difference. That's the dream of the state's project. And of course, she made the difference, being the 102nd vote, in Pennsylvania now having a legislature, or at least a house, that believes in democracy. A house that believes in basic rights and personal privacy and freedoms for individuals. And having a house that's going to try to drive resources to working Pennsylvanians across the state rather than to the tiny number of special interests that have become all too used to getting their way when they knock on the doors of majority legislators from the other party in the state. She knocked on doors. She had the dollars to communicate. She knew what her future bosses, her constituents, needed to know about her, and was sure to drive that message in the campaign. That is democracy at work.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say that's fabulous. I want to turn it a little bit over to some of the reps right now. Layering on what you said, Daniel, I'm going to start with Rep Noah Arbit. You heard what happened in Missy's race. Okay, if I call you Missy, now you're the official, my official state rep. No, so this is for all three state reps. All three of you flipped Republican districts. Why do you think you were able to do that? We'll go Noah, Deborah, Missy, and then back to you, Dan.
Sure. Well, for me, a big part of it was redistricting helped. My community had been gerrymandered for 20 years. Actually, it's actually really interesting. And first of all, it's so great to be here with all of you. So great to see you, Jill, and some of our other JBC colleagues, as well as some family I have here from Wisconsin, Tanya, Nomi, Bruce. It's great to see you guys. And Daniel, thank you so much for everything that you did. You supported my campaign, and I'm very grateful for that. I think a couple things. So first of all, redistricting is really important. Can either help or hurt candidates, can either help or hurt pro-democracy forces. In Michigan, we passed Proposal 2 in 2018, which basically instituted an independent citizens redistricting commission for the first time. And I think it's no coincidence that for the first time in 40 years, Michigan now has a Democratic trifecta, House, Senate, Governor, as well as Attorney General and Secretary of State. So since January 1st, we have really been sort of zooming ahead, bolstered by our majorities in the House and Senate. Now they are very slim majorities. We've got a 1-seat majority in both the House and the Senate. But redistricting clearly helps. But I've been yammering on this since day one, that you have to find candidates that fit their districts, candidates that know their districts, and candidates that are known by their districts, right? For me, it was really important that when I ran and I had a very competitive Democratic primary, and I smoked both of my candidates because I was the only candidate in my primary that was actually from my community. And so I was knocking on doors of classmates, of parents of classmates, of teachers that I'd had, of roommates of my parents. And that is a resource that you can't buy. That knowledge of, and also I represent the most Jewish district in the state of Michigan. I'm one of only 2 Jews in the Michigan House, and for years this district had not been represented well. And actually, when you talk about the gerrymander of my district, it is one of the only only cases that we know of across the country that was actually designed, a gerrymander that was designed to disempower the Jewish community, because the Jewish community is so substantial in my district, and that, some of the discovery in the lawsuits that was released show that they were deliberately trying to split up the Jewish vote. And we talk a lot about how gerrymanders are designed to disempower Black voters, oftentimes Hispanic voters. This is one of the only cases we know of that was designed to disempower Jewish voters. So I was elected off the back of Jewish voters, Black voters, Muslim voters, Asian voters, and I have a very diverse district, but with about a 20% Jewish population. And so it was really important for me, as you noted, Jill, I founded the Michigan Jewish Democrats, helped start JBC together with you. And so that experience and the values that I brought to my race, my number one issue that I campaigned on was hate crimes and Michigan's deficient hate crimes statute, and all the work that I felt we needed to do to tackle hate crimes and extremism that are just so precipitously rising, and that we as Jews understand very well. I had politicians, elected officials, Democrats tell me, "You're going to lose. What are you talking about? That is not a kitchen table issue." But I knew my community. I knew that this was an issue that wasn't going to be whatever. It's true. It wasn't what everyone else was campaigning on, but it differentiated me. It set me apart, but it also put me closer to what my constituents wanted. And so that was so important for me to have an issue. I also wasn't going to be the same candidate on the stump talking about road funding and clean water. Not that I don't care about those things, and not that my constituency doesn't care about those things, but as something that just moved me, and I was able to move people by speaking from that space. And so I think it's really important. Dan mentioned, the importance of, candidates leading their own messaging. I can't emphasize how important that is enough. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. It's really important that we have people who understand their communities. Who better to lead on those issues than someone who's actually from their community, right? We're running to
that does make that layers very nicely on exactly with what Daniel was saying about Missy. And Deb, can you talk about why you believe you were able to not only flip your seat, but then win again as an incumbent? And do you agree with some of the commentary about knowing your district and what your voters want?
Yeah, thank you, Jill. And I couldn't agree with Noah more. He really talked about a couple of things that I think are just really important. And I just want to thank Linda and say ni hao for coming in from China. She was one of the very few people that I met with before the world shut down. I was a COVID candidate. And so a lot of the rules were thrown out the window for me at the last minute. So I kind of had to make up a playbook as I went along. But whether or not you have to pivot to doing everything virtually by COVID, or whether or not you are campaigning in where we are now, which is very close to back to normal, knowing your district is probably the most important. When I decided to run, so full disclosure, I actually grew up in Pennsylvania, so I'm so inspired to hear the progress that Pennsylvania is making. Grew up in Lancaster. I graduated from Manheim Township. I've lived in Wisconsin for 20 years now. But we look to Michigan and we look to Pennsylvania as a roadmap to how to get out of our gerrymander, which is one of the most awful, oppressive gerrymanders in the country. So when I decided to run, it came from a deep knowledge of particular issues and my district, as Noah was saying. So I was an elementary school teacher at the time, and I was doing work with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. And so I was helping volunteers meet their legislators in our state capital. We have special sessions. We have divided government. Governor Evers just won a second term by a Wisconsin landslide, which is 3%, because we're always 50-50. And I watched our legislature gavel in and gavel out a special session that the governor had called without talking about gun laws. Now, I know my district, I know my neighbors, and I know that at least 80% of people in Wisconsin think we should have background checks on all gun sales. Well, we can't even discuss it because we can't get a public hearing on any bills, which is controlled by our gerrymandered Wisconsin legislature. So I decided to run partly as a channel for that frustration, and partly because I knew that my district, Linda's district, which had been represented by a Republican for the past 14 years, The people hadn't changed, but our Wisconsin Republican Party had changed. They had pivoted to the right. So my district, I would say, is very purple, where you have moderates, but we have a Republican Party that hitched its wagon to Donald Trump, and left a lot of people who really couldn't identify with a party that wanted to decertify votes in the city of Milwaukee and wanted to throw the entire state of Wisconsin over into the Donald Trump column, when we know that Joe Biden won by 30,000 votes. So knowing your district is important. I ran on a campaign that focused on gun violence, which traditionally a lot of people would say that is not something you want to put front and center, but I did because I knew my district. And we were able to reach out to voters. Now, I was not able to knock on 10,000 doors. I was not able to knock on very many doors at all because it was COVID. We did phone, we did a lot of over the air. I had to, phone call lots and lots of people every single day. But knowing the district that you're running in, knowing the issues that you care about, and knowing the issues that your voters care about will go a long way. I was able to talk about how my representative, who had been in office for 14 years, really hadn't changed at all. He basically went to Madison and punched one party's button over and over and over again. When you represent a purple district, people tend to notice that eventually. So I'm one of only 3 people in a decade to have been able to flip a district in our gerrymander from Republican to Democrat. We have I don't know if monumental is a word big enough, Supreme Court election coming up April, where we may be able to tip the balance of Wisconsin Supreme Court from conservative to progressive, at which point we can challenge our gerrymandered maps. I was the lead author of the Fair Maps bill in the Assembly, where we could get that independent redistricting commission that so many states have had, that have been allowed them to pursue policies that are popular with the public and get public hearings. So watch Wisconsin in April. I'm very, very cautiously and hopefully optimistic that we'll be following the path of Wisconsin and Michigan. And I hope that those 2 states are blazing the way so that we can follow in your footsteps and have an opportunity to pass, gun control, be able to pass fair maps, be able to pass. We have an abortion law that dates back to 1849. Would like to get rid of that too. So there's a lot riding on our April election, and
your judicial election is so important for all the Wisconsin folks on here. It is a really uber important race. So Missy, we talked about your race. So can you talk about what Noah and Deb spoke about in terms of the changing of the district lines, how that impacted your race? And Noah spoke about the issues that impacted his race that people told him not to focus on. And Deb spoke about her issues. Daniel said there was an issue that enabled you to win, but we didn't hear what that issue is. So what was that issue? And talk about the gerrymandering issue as well.
Absolutely. So in my district, as you know, because you were in it, we had a 12-year Republican incumbent in position who was known as a more moderate Republican. However, he voted for his leadership. And the reality is our leadership in Pennsylvania has gotten more extreme over the years. This is the first time in over a decade that we have had a Democratic majority. And for me, the reality is it comes down to doors and dollars. And for me, I didn't have the dollars starting off in this race. I had worked running another legislative office for 4 years, and I didn't have a huge amount of people that I could call and ask for donations. And I started the race saying the only way I win this race is to meet as many people in my community as humanly possible and hear from them what they feel is important. Clearly, the maps in Pennsylvania, due to redistricting, had a huge advantage for me, particularly. My district was, drastically changed in the redistricting process, but it was an amazing, amazing feat to try and overcome. And, you know, as Daniel had said, we were on our 5th round of door knocks by the time election day arose. We truly took the time to listen to people. I feel that the most important thing in the world is hearing from people what affects them most every day. I was uniquely positioned to do so, having run another legislative office for 4 years during COVID, during the most extreme times in most people's lives, hearing the suffering and the pain that they had gone through, to be able to connect with those people that I met on the doors. But the reality is I wouldn't have been able to do so had I not been able to get the funds in order to pay for things such as my TV, my literature, etc., to hit the people that we couldn't talk to in apartment complexes and other non-soliciting areas. So for me, that was a huge, obstacle that I was able to overcome due to the state's project stepping in and saying, hey, we want you to focus on getting to know your constituency base. We want you to know what matters most to the people in your district, and that way you can focus. So I had challenges with my consultants. There were issues over what they thought would be best to put out there as far as TV commercials. And I fought back and I said, no, I have heard from enough people in my district. They care about reproductive rights. They care about, having real people they connect with in Harrisburg, fighting for them, not your standard politician, someone who is able to say, I've been on Medicaid myself. My children have received free and reduced lunches over the years. I have struggled with financial situations. So I know what you are going through today, and I will fight to help you overcome that. And it was an amazing race. It took a long time. We were the last race to be called in Pennsylvania, but we took the majority and we elected our first ever female Speaker of the House, the second ever African-American Speaker of the Pennsylvania House just today. So it's been an incredible day. Tomorrow we'll go in and vote on rules, and hopefully we'll see much progress happening in Pennsylvania because of it.
Fabulous. Daniel, my next question is for you. So all 3 of these amazing state reps were able to flip seats. What are the keys, do you believe, to flipping a Republican House seat Democratic? And is there anything that is basic in all these campaigns that, we're talking about 3 different states. So is there any 2 particular things that are really basic to doing that?
I don't know as much about Rep. Andraca's race, but actually I know a little bit about it because it was a really well-run race that was noticeable even in a legislature that, with the maps drawn the way they are, is not a tipping point legislature. With fair maps, by the way, it absolutely would be. It becomes absolutely the center of what really has to be a movement across the country. So everything that Rep. Andraca said is true. I know that it's true in Rep. Arbit and Rep. Serrato's races. The first thing I would say, by the way, it's true in my race too, it was a primary, but more attention and focus on these races really helps. What you have again and again and again, and we worked in over 170 districts just this past cycle, is you have the kinds of candidates that Rep. Arbit talked about on the Democratic side who really share their district's values. They really do. By the way, sometimes it really is traffic, and that's a really important issue. And on the other side, you have folks who are trying to hide both sort of who's behind them and also what they stand behind. So, we had a significant number of candidates who really didn't believe in democracy running as Republicans, but they were trying to fudge that. We had, among Democrats, candidates who support public safety investments in police, and who were having to spend their race basically fight back against lies and associations that just weren't about who they were as individual candidates. The more attention and focus was on these races, the more both candidates got known by the constituents, the better our candidates did. Now, how do you do that? There are really 2 ways. One is It is dollars, because dollars are voter communication when well spent. Sometimes dollars aren't, but overwhelmingly dollars are voter communication in well-run campaigns. When we're giving dollars, we make absolutely sure that's what they're going towards. The second is focus and attention. And here I have to say, and I am personally a big fan of your new governor, near neighbors with my wife and my wife's family. A huge fan of your new lieutenant governor, who was a fellow through our lawmaker program, Austin Davis, before he was lieutenant governor. But I always say, and I say this respectfully to them and to other great congressional and statewide office holders around the country, every time I convince people like the folks on this call to talk about and think about and focus on a state legislative race, I'm doing a marginal damage to those statewide candidates. They have tens of thousands of people focusing on them and giving them attention. And we're doing enormous service for state legislative candidates because no one effectively, statistically, is focused on them. So where each of you chooses to spend your time and attention, not just dollars, your conversations, your focus, your relationship building, makes an enormous difference, because as just a percentage basis, every time someone decides to think about, talk about, focus on, bring up at a dinner table or with their neighbors in the backyard, a state legislative race, you're having a much bigger impact on how much that race is thought about than you do on any statewide race or congressional race.
So to win these races takes financial resources. Daniel, you spoke directly to that, in the beginning. But this for Deb, Missy, and Noah, can you tell us how much it costs to win a state rep race? How important money is to you to win? And do you think campaign finance reform would fix some of these problems? Because people, when they donate, they tend to look at the 4-year elections. They look at Biden, or they look at a Senate race, or even they start looking federally, at federal House races. And that's where it seems that the money goes. And particularly among Democrats, and Daniel spoke to this as well, we forget about the importance of state legislatures. So could each of you, if you're willing, to say how much it costs to win this seat, how we can best help you, and what campaign finance reform would do? I'll start with you, Noah.
Sure. I think a couple things. One, I just want to respond to something that Daniel said, but I think as a young person in particular, there are so many people, especially young people, who are sick of Democrats, who are scared of their shadows, and to sort of run on the things that you're passionate about, that your community is passionate about, shows a willingness to be authentic to the values that you share with your voters, right? And not shying away from them. And so that's one thing that I think is really important and sort of separates people who, I always said during my campaign, always. And when I said this, initially I just sort of said it off the cuff, and then someone's eyes went like this. I said, I'm not running to be something, I'm running to do something. And, it was just like a light bulb. And I think for so long, people have seen people who just, sort of want to be there for, to have a title and a gold nameplate and for sort of self-aggrandizing purposes. But the new freshman class of the Michigan House is half of the Democratic caucus. 28 out of 56 members of the House Democratic caucus in Michigan are freshmen. And we are very different from the existing class. And there is a little bit of a culture clash going on right now, because we're more progressive, but be that as it may, talking about money, I started really early. And I really believe that is so profoundly important to have a long runway. I announced in August, before election year, August of 2021, for my November 2022 election. I didn't know whether I was going to have a red. I ran in a red seat that was going to be like the top targeted seat. Ended up having a bluer seat after redistricting. I drew the map, like, you know, you got to use the tools that are available to you. I raised $300,000 in my race. I was one of the top fundraisers. I broke a ton of fundraising records. Thank you to those of you on this call, many of you who generously contributed to my campaign. I'm so grateful to be here and to be able to do this work, and couldn't have done it without you. And that truly, the campaign contribution limits in Michigan, about $1,000 per person, about $2,500. They adjusted them to inflation this year, but not the minimum wage, right? So let's talk about campaign finance reform. But it's not as big as a federal race, which, Alyssa Slotkin just announced her campaign for Senate. I'm getting texts to donate $6,500 to her. Linda, I know you're getting those texts too. But and that's the thing, is that the amount of impact $1 can have in a state legislative race versus a federal race is so profoundly, it is just, the value add is just, it's incomprehensible how different it is. And the thing is too, it's not just about money, it's also about influence. If you have your state legislator's cell phone number, or, me getting calls from my constituents is so much more impactful than me sitting down with a lobbyist who's telling me how they want me to vote on a bill. No, if I'm getting a call from a constituent because I know them, and my favorite thing was during my swearing in, I saw people who came to watch me be sworn in that I only met because I met them at the doors. It filled my heart, and that's what it is, building that boat, to sort of be that leader in your community. And so I really think that a couple of things, starting early is really important to get that long runway to a campaign. I didn't really find my messaging until about April of election year. And then it was like, I ran away with it. And I won my primary by 16 points, and I won the general election by almost 14 points. So it's really important that you do that. And then, one of the things I also had was a community, being known in my community and knowing my community. I had such a wealth of resources and again, I also came from a pretty wealthy district. I have the wealthiest district in the state. And so I was able to raise those resources, and not everyone has that. But yeah, campaign finance reform is really important too. I'd like to see people be able to give more money and PACs be able to give less money. So I'd like to rebalance those scales, because I'm watching it play out in real time as a freshman legislator, the amount of influence, and I'm kind of accepted from it because I don't need PACs to by and large to get reelected. But I'm watching as my freshmen, fellow legislators are sort of having to contend with like raising money from these different like groups, and it's so unseemly.
With the exception of EJOP, which is a PAC that we all love.
It's true. PACs are neutral. PACs are totally neutral.
I'm only kidding with you. Deb, can you talk about finances in terms of your race too, and what you felt was useful?
Sure. In Wisconsin, for a state assembly race, we are limited to $1,000 per contributor. But parties, there's a lot of loopholes to that. So state parties and PACs can give you different amounts of money, but we do have some limits. The result of that is that you have to, I could get $1,000 from everybody in my district, but my race costs $700,000 for a job that pays $50,000 a year. It is crazy, and obviously there needs to be reforms. But whenever anyone is asking me about, how do you get into a race and how do you raise all of the money, I really emphasize, you can spend all the money you want and millions of dollars, but if you don't have your message down, all of it is for naught, because you have to know your district, you have to know your constituents, and you have to really know what you stand for. So all different states have different contribution limits, but you need to kind of know who are you talking to, what are you trying to do. So in my situation, which is different than the other legislators on this call, so I didn't have a primary, so I didn't have any other Democrats to run against, and I was just in a general election against a Republican who had been in office for 14 years, and I was trying to flip a district that had voted for Republicans forever. Like this is the first time a Democrat has ever represented this district. So it was important to me to focus on values, because parties have their talking points, but what are the values where we can meet in the middle? For me, my campaign slogan was safer, smarter, healthier. We want a safer district. We want we want to invest in education, and we want healthy communities. And I divided that because suddenly it was COVID, where we were talking about both, believing in science and following science protocols, but also investing in a healthy environment and climate change. So when, I tried to break out of the party boundaries to talk about the values that we all shared, the values where I could reach across the aisle to people who had traditionally voted Republican, who said, yes, well, I may identify as a Republican voter, but suddenly there's this other person talking about ways that we cannot have school shootings that the other person is not talking about, because he wants to talk about, allowing, 18-year-olds to buy any firearm they want with unlimited ammunition. So in a purple district, which is, it's a very different race than running in a Democratic primary or other races, what I focused on was, what are my neighbors' value? What do they want to see the state going forward? So that is what I focused on. And fundraising, it's awful. None of us want to do it, but identifying those in Wisconsin, where we're still under just a brutal gerrymander. So I flipped a district in 2020. I had a different district in 2022, is finding ways to connect with voters on values across party lines, and then fundraising around that. I was fortunate that I was able to connect with and get the endorsement from elected leaders who were Republicans in very conservative areas, because they liked what I did on specific issues. So that would be my advice to people who are looking in very purple districts, to flip districts that have not traditionally voted Democratic, in history.
Thank you. Now, Missy, Pennsylvania is the Wild West of state campaign finance reform. There are no limits. So what was that like for you, running against an incumbent who was a sixth-term incumbent, who had all kinds, and who was a perceived moderate? So he was getting money in from all over the place, and endorsements and support from organizations that one would have thought were more traditionally Democratic. So how were you able to raise funds, and how did Pennsylvania's campaign finance structure, which is different than Michigan and Wisconsin, impact your raise?
So I am a huge proponent for campaign finance reform. In Pennsylvania, we have no limits. We can accept any dollar amount from any donor, and there is absolutely nothing anyone can do to stop it. I personally am so morally opposed to the way that we campaign here in Pennsylvania. I think the money that goes into these races, I think when we add up the money that was done in the past 3 cycles for my seat, it equates to almost $6 million spent just to get one House seat. The amount of people that money could have gone to help is horrifying to me on a personal level. Someone that has struggled financially for many, many periods of my life. It is very difficult to wrap my head around the amount of money that are spent on campaigns, frankly, every 2 years. It is hard to know that in my race, because I was not the incumbent, I did not have the incumbency protection from unions, for instance, and a lot of the organizations that do traditionally donate to Democratic candidates. I believe by the very end, I might have had under $1,000 from union organizations total. So I was a grassroots campaign. My average donation, I believe, by the end was about $15.71 per donor. Again, I really truly relied on organizations such as the States Project to help me. I was willing to show them that I was going to put the work in on my end as a candidate to make sure that I was doing everything I could to flip this seat. But I really needed help with donations. They actually only asked me to run less than 2 weeks from the date that I was required to collect my petitions. I had a shortened time frame, so instead of the 2 to 3 weeks as normal, I had 9 days to get 1,000 signatures turned in, and I had no background. Unlike Noah, I started my race 2 weeks before petition season, so there was no fundraising, there was no volunteers organized ahead of time, there was no preparation. It was hit the ground running and be sure that I was willing to work my rear end off from start to finish to get this seat flipped. And luckily we were able.
And I can attest to that. So I live in her district. They could not get anybody to run for this seat. I have been a committee person in this district for a long time. I wasn't anymore. And before Melissa was recruited, I got call after call asking, did I know somebody who would want to run for that seat? Because no one believed, even with the reconfigured district, that someone could beat an incumbent. So it's nothing short of miraculous and showing what door knocking and support from an organization like the States Project can do, and having a good candidate. When you look at Noah and Missy and Deborah, you have good candidates too, who know their districts. And bravo to all of these candidates who are so good. I have one quick question for Daniel, and then I want to go back to the candidates. My question for you, Daniel, is right now, what is the imbalance when looking at all the states and looking at all 50 states? How many state houses are under Democratic control? How many under Republican control? And you hear a lot in the news that the Republicans have a stronger hold on these houses. Is that true? Wait, you're on mute, I think.
Yes. Yes, it is true. I actually do not have the new number at hand for a variety of reasons, one of which is that we flipped so many in November. One of the other state lawmakers might. It is a good statistic to have at hand, so I apologize for that. But we flipped just this past November, the Pennsylvania House, really this morning, the Pennsylvania House, the Michigan House, the Michigan Senate, the Minnesota Senate, all flipped. And that was enormous. It was the first time since 1934 that the incumbent president's party in a midterm had not lost any legislative chambers. And a majority are still held by Republicans, including, so, the in bluing state, ever more blue state of Arizona, one seat in each chamber makes it Republican legislature there. Rep. Andraka talked about Wisconsin. Ohio, which is a much closer state, is sort of an interesting one because they have gerrymandering that holds Republicans in power forever, but the most extreme Republicans and more moderate Republicans split. So you have 22 Democrats and 30 Republicans who are somewhat more moderate, creating a majority in the Ohio House. The opportunity to change this direction in all kinds of ways is real if we do it. And just I'll conclude by saying the money is certainly really shocking when you think about state legislatures. It is also shockingly small when you think about any other level of politics. $5 billion is spent on national politics in a cycle. The States Project spent nearly $60 million. We were the largest outside spender in state legislatures in American history, 1 penny on the dollar. Beto O'Rourke's campaign raised north of $55 million. Beto O'Rourke is a candidate who I have a lot of respect for. That was not a winnable race, but it was a race with $55 million. $55 million more dollars into state legislative races around the country would change America, full stop.
So with respect to Noah, Melissa, and Missy, and Deb, what can we do as activists? Everyone on this call is a Democrat who cares about making sure we get more Democrats in office at the state legislative level. what do you believe we should be doing as activists? I'm going to start with you, Missy.
So I think the most important thing is just to get engaged in the races. Do what you can. If you have $1 to donate that dollar. If you have no money to donate, make those phone calls, knock those doors. You know, I can't thank the people that stepped up in my race enough. The amount of support that I had, I could have never accomplished what I did on my own. It was all thanks to the people that cared enough to step up. So, you know, every dollar matters in these races. It truly does. As much as I hate the money that goes into the races, we can't reach people. No matter how many doors we knock, there are people we will never, ever reach on a door. We can go back to the same house 10 times and never get the person. So the money really does matter. And if you have the money to give it. If you don't, find another way to volunteer. Postcard write, knock on a door, make a phone call, but just get engaged, because every person volunteering truly makes the difference.
Noah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Rep. Serrato said. And I would say, you know, whether it's in your own district, a neighboring district, or anywhere in your state, or even in another state, adopt a district, adopt a candidate, find candidates that, you know, are sort of hinge candidates, whether it's either, you know, a seat that needs to flip a chamber, or a seat that you know, the Democrats need to hold in a chamber. You know, find a race and get involved, whether it's close to home or far away from home. I mean, you know, as everyone on this amazing call has said tonight, I think the bottom line here is that resources in a state legislative race go so much further to do good for people across this country than even federal races, because, you know, $1,000 to a Senate candidate is a drop in the bucket. $1,000 to a state legislative candidate is like an entire month of salary for you know, a part-time employee. It's an entire, you know, stack of literature. It's so much, right? That you can do with that. And so it's everything. And so those resources just go a lot further. If you know, in these upcoming, and by the way, we have a presidential election coming up. It's even less of a return on your investment. I mean, those campaigns get, you know, I mean, Joe Biden's going to raise $1 billion. And you know, it's none of us are going to make a dent. Maybe some of my family members who help raise money for him might, but you know, it's really so important that we get engaged and build, you know, from the ground up. Every single, I mean, my governor, Gretchen Whitmer, who may or may not run for president eventually, initially, you know, began as a state legislator. It served in the minority the entire time for 14 years. And now she's governing in a trifecta. And so, and Barack Obama, again, famously an Illinois state senator. So, you know, if we want to build the next generation of Democratic political talent, it starts right here in the state legislatures. So it's just really important. I'm so grateful.
I agree.
To these issues. So,
Deb, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Yes, money helps, of course. It always does. You can't get your message out without it. But everyone on this call is an informed and engaged voter. So relational organizing works. And so I cannot tell you the number of people who I talk to, friends of mine, who ask me as a state legislator, how much time do I spend in Washington, D.C.? And I say none, because I work in Madison. So everyone on this call has friends who you can inform to talk about when there are upcoming elections. Hey, who are you voting for? What is your plan to vote? Oh, did you know there's a spring election too? We don't just vote in November, but there are elections coming up. There's probably judges that don't have an R or a D after their name, who they might be intimidated, or there might be, you know, so, you know, being that person that you can go to, identify your friends who you can get to turn out, because, you know, in Wisconsin right now, we have a spring election. It's historically very low turnout, which means just about anything can happen. But, you know, we on this call, we know that states matter. And we know that states are the key to a lot of the issues that we all care about. But there are a lot of people who don't understand what that really means. And so reach out to your friends, make sure they have a plan to vote, make sure they know why you're voting for the people that you do, because you would be surprised how many times I am asked if I'm in Washington, and it is an education, in a friendly way, in a here's why you need to go and turn out, and here are the candidates that I think that you should support. Maybe it's a candidate in Wisconsin, maybe it's a candidate in New York. When I ran, I had a great network of people in all different states who really cared about this tiny little district that was flippable, that really made a huge difference on the national scene. I had no idea when I was getting into it, probably wouldn't have done it if I'd known what I was getting into. But be that person to activate your networks, because it goes so far.
I agree. Relational connections in elections matter. I'm going to conclude with you, Daniel. Can you tell people how to get involved with the States Project, if they want to help, where they should go, what they should do? I see something is in the chat box, but can you tell people what they can
Mark Moffat doing my job for me. I
Yeah,
appreciate
so
it.
great. Those great candidates are out there all over the country, and you talked about Arizona. We have Deborah Stein on this Zoom, who's doing amazing work out in Arizona, and they have opportunities there. So what can this state project do so we can turn more state houses blue, and how do we help you?
Right. So we have a program we've had from our founding called the Giving Circles program, which actually lets people create their own giving groups. They get a name, a web page, everything, and they get to choose which state among the tipping point states we're working in. 100% of their dollars will help have an impact for. So if it sort of feels like sometimes it's like there's so many reasons not to do state legislative work. Today, you've heard all of the reasons to do it, but there's still one other reason not to, which is it's really complicated. You have 50 states, 51 different campaign finance laws in this country, if you consider the overlay of federal campaign finance law. You have the shiny object problem, which is the person who makes the best web video may not be the person whose seat most needs to be won to actually flip governing power, and flipping governing power is what it's all about. And so if that's overwhelming to you, the Giving Circles program is a way for you to become a leader with your community, a different kind of relational organizing, which is organizing dollars. The average contribution of the Giving Circles program is under $200. So that's one way to do it. The other way is, if you do have the knowledge and you are in a tipping point state, get involved in the overall effort. Because again, my old district, I like to say, would not have been a good target for people who care about state legislatures, though I was in a closely divided one. My district would have elected a Democrat had they been both deceased and imprisoned. And so in order to flip the chamber, we needed other districts. And so make sure you're talking to a lawmaker or legislative leadership that really cares about it. And the final piece is, no one cares about state legislatures unless they really care about state legislatures. So don't let anyone say, yes, also the state legislature. It is probably from a place of honesty and a place of caring about everything, but practically it's not possible. You need to do only state legislatures if you're going to do state legislatures. You need to make sure you're focusing on tipping point seats in tipping point states. And if that feels really hard, go to the statesproject.org, and start a giving circle, and we can make it a whole lot easier.
Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. And remember, a lot of issues have gone back to the states after jobs, like reproductive justice, gun laws. All of that matters at the state legislative level. I want to thank Missy Serrato, Noah Arbit, Deb Andraka, and Daniel Squadron for being with us tonight. This has been informative, educational, and enlightening. On April 18th, we'll have another Jewish battleground event on the rise of anti-Semitism. with Congresswoman Kathy Manning and a representative of the ADL, as well as Eden Cohen from A Wider Frame and Gina Lickman Smith, whose son-in-law, Daniel, is speaking. It was born in a displaced persons camp and is a Holocaust educator. So look for that informational email about that event. And again, thank you so much, all of you, for being here, and let's flip the state houses blue. Thank you.